3 field marshals crossed the Soviet frontier in the same hour, under the same directive, with 3 army groups behind them and 3 headquarters war diaries opened at the same line. Ask a well-read American reader to name the man who commanded Army Group South that summer, and a good many will have it on the first try. Ask for Army Group Center. Ask for Army Group North. The answers come slower, and often they do not come at all. That is the question in this file, not which of the 3 was the better soldier, not which of them Hitler trusted longest. The question is narrower than that, and it has an answer you can put your hand on. Why did one of those 3 names stay in circulation in English while the other 2 fell out of it? Gerd von Rundstedt is the name that stayed. Wilhelm Ritter von Leeb and Fedor von Bock are the 2 that did not. Here is what makes that strange. Bock kept a war diary from the concentration for Poland to the last weeks of the war, dictated to his staff as the days went, and there is a complete English edition of it. Leeb kept diary notes and written situation assessments across 2 world wars, and a scholarly German edition of those runs to a thick single volume. Rundstedt kept no diary. He wrote no memoir. He left interrogation transcripts, courtroom testimony, and whatever his headquarters generated in the ordinary course of business. Of the 3 men, his personal paper is by a long way the thinnest. He is also the only one of the 3 most people can name. So this file has to explain a result that runs against its own evidence. Somewhere between the 22nd of June, 1941, and the shelf in the bookshop, a sorting took place. It was not done by performance. It was not done by the weight of the paper either. It was done by something more mechanical than either of those, and once you can see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it, because it is still running. What I want to do is go through what each of these 3 men commanded, what each of them put his name to, what happened to each of them, and then what happened to their records afterwards. The operations and the criminal orders sit in the same file because that is how the archive holds them, and they are going to be read out in the same voice. Start with what is missing. Count the shelf. For Bock, there is General Feldmarschall Fedor von Bock. The War Diary, 1939 to 1945, edited by Klaus Gerbet, translated by David Johnston, published by Schiffer. It runs the whole way through. It is the fullest contemporaneous record by a German Army Group commander on the Eastern Front available in English, and it spends more of its life out of print than in it. For Leeb, there is Tagebuchaufzeichnungen und Lagebeurteilungen aus 2 Weltkriegen, the diary notes and situation assessments from 2 world wars, edited by Georg Meyer and published by Deutsche Verlagsanstalt in Stuttgart in 1976, 31 years after the surrender. It has never appeared in English. If you do not read German, Leeb's own account of what he did in front of Leningrad is shut to you. For Rundstedt, there is neither of those things. What there is instead is a book called Von Rundstedt, The Soldier and the Man, published in English in 1952, while its subject was alive and living in Hanover, and written by Günther Blumentritt, who had been Rundstedt's chief of staff at Oberbefehlshaber West from September 1942. A subordinate's account of his own chief, written in the language of the men who had just beaten him, on the shelves within 7 years of the surrender. 4 decades later came Charles Messenger's The Last Prussian, a critical biography built from the files rather than from the staff. Count that again. The man who left no personal record has 2 English books with his name on the spine. The man who left the fullest personal record has 1 English edition that comes and goes. The third man's record has never crossed the language barrier at all. I want to be precise about what thin means here because Rundstedt is not undocumented. His Army Group's operational orders, its daily situation reports, its distribution lists, and its rear area files all survive in the same series as everybody else's. What he did not leave is a first-person account of his own reasoning. Everything we have in his own voice was produced under caution, in a British camp or an American courtroom, by a man who knew what the questions were for. The systematic work covering all 3 is Johannes Hurter's Hitler's Heerführer, published in Munich in 2006, a collective study of 25 German Army Group and Army commanders in the war against the Soviet Union across its first year. Herder took them as a group rather than one at a time, which is the only way this particular pattern becomes visible. That book is also German only. A lot of you in the comments have been asking for these 2 in particular, and the reason they are hard to run down is not that nothing was written about them. Everything was written down. The problem sits downstream of the writing. Consider the size of what these men were handed. 3.8 million Axis troops stood in the east on the morning of the 22nd of June. 153 German divisions were committed, along with roughly 600,000 horses and about the same number of motor vehicles. Every German operation between the frontier and the outskirts of Moscow that year ran through one of 3 headquarters. The men who ran those headquarters were 65, 64, and 60 years old. Take the oldest first. Karl Rudolf Gerd von Rundstedt was born on the 12th of December 1875 at Aschersleben and commissioned in June 1893. General Staff Officer through the First War, General Oberst on the 1st of March 1938. He left the Army at his own request on the 31st of October that year and was made Honorary Chief of Infantry Regiment 18 4 days after. Recalled in April 1939 to run a planning staff for Poland, he took Army Group South into Poland, then Army Group A into France, where the armored thrust through the Ardennes was launched from his headquarters, General Feldmarschall, on the 19th of July 1940. Commander-in-Chief West from October 1940 until the 1st of April 1941, when he handed the post to Erwin von Witzleben and went east. By 1941, he was the senior soldier in the German army by date of rank and by reputation, the officer other officers were measured against, and he traded on it. He was also, by every account of him, including the friendly ones, disengaged from detail. He read the situation map in the morning and left the working of it to his chief of staff. Wilhelm Joseph Franz Ritter von Leeb was born on the 5th of September 1876 at Landsberg am Lech, Bavarian artillery. He served in China during the Boxer expedition. In the First War, he was given the Military Order of Max Joseph, which carried personal nobility with it, and that is where the Ritter von in his name comes from. General der Artillerie on the 1st of January 1934. He was pushed out in February 1938 during the Blomberg and Fritsch affair, the shakeout that cleared a set of senior officers Hitler had no further use for, and he was handed the character of General Oberst on his way through the door. That same year he published a book called Die Abwehr, a study of the defensive battle, and it became the German army's working text on how to give ground and still hold. Hold that thought, because a man who wrote the manual on elastic defense is going to be relieved in 1942 for asking permission to conduct one. He was recalled for the Sudeten crisis, retired again, recalled once more in the summer of 1939. In the autumn of that year, he put his objections to the planned offensive in the West into writing and circulated them more than once in terms that went past operational risk and into whether the thing should be attempted at all. It did not stop the offensive. He took Army Group C in the West, and his troops went through the Maginot Line in June 1940. General Feldmarschall on the same day as Rundstedt in the same ceremony. Moritz Albrecht Franz Friedrich Fedor von Bock was born on the 3rd of December 1880 at Kustrin on the Oder, the youngest of the three by 5 years. Cadet school, then the Guards, then the General Staff. General der Infanterie on the 1st of March 1935. General Oberst 3 years later to the day. In the army he was known as Der Sterber, roughly the one who dies, for the sort of speech he made to troops about sacrifice. He had Army Group North in Poland from the 26th of August, 1939, then Army Group B in the West, the force that went into Holland and Belgium and pulled the Allied armies north while the decision was made 200 kilometers to the south. Field Marshal's baton in that same ceremony, standing in the same row as the other two. Of the three, he was the one who wanted the next command and said so. Their chiefs of staff for the East were Georg von Saudenstern at Army Group South, Kurt Brennecke at Army Group North, and Hans von Greifenberg at Army Group Center. Those three names matter, because on an Army Group staff, the chief signs a great deal of what the commander is later asked about. Now the paper that reached all three desks before a shot was fired. On the 30th of March, 1941, Hitler assembled the senior commanders for the Eastern Campaign at the Reich Chancellery and spoke for something over 2 hours. Franz Halder, chief of the General Staff, recorded the substance of it in his own diary. The war coming was not to be conducted as a normal war between states, and the usual notion of soldierly comradeship toward the enemy was to be set aside. Leeb was in the room. 6 weeks later, on the 13th of May, the decree on the exercise of military jurisdiction in the Barbarossa area went out over Wilhelm Keitel's signature. It took Soviet civilians out of the reach of courts-martial and put the decision on their lives with officers in the field. It authorized collective measures of force against the inhabitants of a locality where an act against German troops had occurred, on the authority of a battalion commander, or above, and it stated that the prosecution of German soldiers for offenses against enemy civilians was not required unless discipline demanded it. Walter von Brauchitsch, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, amended it on the 24th of May in a way that narrowed nothing about its intent and only guarded against individual excess. On the 6th of June came the guidelines for the treatment of political commissars. First drafted a month earlier by General Eugen Müller, amended by Brockich on the same day he touched the jurisdiction decree, issued in final form by OKW. Captured political officers were to be separated from other prisoners at once and shot. Personal impression of a man's attitude was to count for more than proof. The order stood for 11 months and was rescinded on the 6th of May, 1942. Bock protested it. He did so verbally through Army High Command, pushed to it by two officers on his own staff, Henning von Treschow and Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf. When nothing came back, he is supposed to have turned to them and said that he wished it noted that Field Marshal von Bock had protested. That line reaches us through Gersdorf, who told the story after the war. It is his account, not a document, and I am flagging it as his account. What is not in dispute is that the order was distributed, that it went into effect across all three army groups on the 22nd of June, and that Jürgen Förster's work in the German Official History series established that the majority of German units carried it out. That is the desk, now the ground. Leeb's Army Group North went in from East Prussia with 26 infantry divisions, 3 panzer divisions, and 3 motorized divisions. Georg von Köchler had 18th Army on the left, Ernst Busch had 16th Army on the right, and Erich Hübner's Panzer Group 4 sat between them. Luftflotte 1 under Alfred Keller flew over the top. The objective was the Baltic states, then Leningrad. Bock's Army Group Center went in either side of the Białystok salient. Adolf Strauss had 9th Army, Günther von Kluge had 4th Army, and the two panzer groups made up the strongest concentration of armor ever assembled under one commander to that point. Hermann Hoth with Panzer Group 3 in the north, and Heinz Guderian with Panzer Group 2 in the south. Luftflotte 2 under Albert Kesselring. The objective was Smolensk, and past Smolensk, the road to Moscow. Rundstedt's Army Group South went in from southern Poland and from Romania. Walter von Reichenau had 6th Army. Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel had 17th Army. Eugen Ritter von Schobert had 11th Army. And Ewald von Kleist had Panzer Group 1 with 5 panzer divisions, 4 motorized divisions, and 799 tanks. 3rd and 4th Romanian armies came in on the southern flank. Luftflotte 4 under Alexander Luhr. The objective was the Ukraine and Kiev. 3 army groups, 1 directive. Within 8 days, the 3 results are already diverging, far enough apart that the plan itself starts to come under strain. Bock's went fastest. Guderian and Hoth met east of Minsk on the 29th of June, and the ring closed the following day, 180 kilometers past the frontier in a week. German returns put 287,704 prisoners in the Białystok and Minsk pockets. Soviet accounting for the same operation records losses in the region of 417,000 men, along with 4,799 tanks and 9,427 guns and mortars. He did not stop there. Panzer Group 2 and Panzer Group 3 closed a second ring around Smolensk on the 27th of July. The initial German report gave 309,000 prisoners, and that was later revised upward to 350,000, with 3,120 guns destroyed and more than 900 aircraft. 2 rings in 5 weeks, and on the lower of the 2 German counts for the second one, something close to 600,000 men inside them. Leeb's went nearly as fast and much further per division. Erich von Manstein's Corps and Hübner's Panzer Group covered roughly 300 kilometers in 4 days and took the road bridge over the Dvina at Daugavpils intact on the 26th of June. To the west of him, Georg Hans Reinhardt's Corps was fighting off the heaviest Soviet armored counterattack of the northern sector at Rasenii. Riga fell on the 1st of July. Then came the Luga River line and the ground north of it, and the pace came off and did not come back. Rundstedt's went slowest, and it went slowest for a reason that is not about Rundstedt. Kleist ran into the largest concentration of Soviet armor on the whole frontier around Brody and Dubno in the last week of June. As many as 3,000 Red Army tanks committed in a series of counterattacks that were badly coordinated and expensive to beat. He beat them. It cost him the tempo, and the tempo was the whole plan. By the beginning of August, the 3 army groups had produced 3 different campaigns out of 1 operational directive, and the argument at the top of the German army was no longer about how to execute it. It was about which of the 3 to reinforce. Quick note before the next part. Our team has put together a book of 50 German commanders, admirals, and airmen. Every entry the same: final rank commands, operations, decorations, fate, then what the record holds against what was claimed. 824 licensed photographs in it. There's a separate volume carrying 746 of them in color, restored and upscaled from the originals. Head over to GermanCommand.com and check for yourself. The argument was settled in August, and it was settled against Bock. Hitler ordered Guderian's panzer group to turn 90 degrees south, out of Army Group Center's axis, and into the northern flank of the Soviet forces holding the Kiev Bulge. Bock argued against it at the time, not afterwards, which is one of the things his diary is genuinely useful for. Halder argued against it. Brauchitsch argued against it. Guderian flew to see Hitler on the 23rd of August and came away with his panzer group kept together and his direction changed anyway. It produced the largest encirclement in the history of land warfare. Kleist came north, Guderian came south, and the two met near Lochwitza on the 16th of September, about 120 kilometers southeast of Kiev. German reports claimed 665,000 prisoners. Soviet accounts have never accepted that figure and put it at not more than 222,000. The gap between those two numbers is not a rounding error, and it is not resolvable from one side. German counts swept up men in the rear areas who had never appeared on a Soviet unit return, and Soviet counts start from establishment strengths that were already fictional by September. Both figures are in the notes, and both are attributed to the side that produced them. That was the second great pocket for Rundstedt's headquarters. The first had closed at Uman on the 2nd of August with 103,000 prisoners. While that was happening in the south, Leeb's front was closing on Leningrad and then stopping short of it on purpose. Panzer Group 4 and 18th Army reached Lake Ladoga at Schlisselburg on the 8th of September and cut the last land route into the city. The city was not to be stormed. Requests to negotiate a surrender were to be refused, and that instruction reached Army Group North at the end of September, reinforced by a further order passed through Alfred Jodl in early October. The intention was to hold the ring and let the winter do the work. Between 1.5 million and 2 million people died in and around Leningrad over the next 2.5 years, with the figure for starvation alone commonly put near 900,000. Leeb's headquarters ordered artillery to fire on civilians who attempted to leave the encirclement, and to do it out of view of the forward infantry. That order is well established in the literature on the siege. I have not been able to put a file date and a reference on it myself, and I am telling you that rather than dressing it up. On the 5th of September, Hitler ordered Panzer Group 4 away from Leeb and back to Bock, effective on the 15th. Leeb was left holding a ring around a city he had been forbidden to enter, with his armor gone and his front lengthening east of Lake Ilmen. Operation Typhoon opened at the end of September, with Bock holding the largest force any German commander handled in the war. 3 panzer groups and 3 armies. The pockets at Vyazma and Bryansk closed in October. German claims for the two together came to 673,000 prisoners. More recent research revises that down to about 514,000, which is still the second largest haul of the war. Then the rain came. From the middle of October, the roads in front of Army Group Center stopped being roads. The Mojaisk defense line was broken through and the advance still slowed to walking pace. Because a horse-drawn infantry division moves at the speed of its worst 1.5 kilometers, the German army in the east was horse-drawn. The frost that hardened the ground in November also froze the engines, and the last German attacks came within about 30 kilometers of the Kremlin before they stopped. The Red Army attacked on the 5th of December on the Kalinin front, and on the 6th along the western and northwestern fronts. Bock's army group had been in continuous operations for 167 days. Rundstedt had already gone. Kleist took Rostov on the 21st of November with an exposed and unsupported spearhead. The Soviet Southern Front under Yakov Cherevichenko counterattacked on the 27th with Anton Lopatin's 37th Army. Rostov was back in Soviet hands on the 28th. Rundstedt authorized a withdrawal to the Mayos, about 70 kilometers to the west, and Hitler ordered the city held the day after it had already been given up. Rundstedt's reply went back over the wire. If confidence in his leadership no longer existed, he asked that someone be substituted who enjoyed the necessary confidence. Hitler took him at his word and relieved him on the 1st of December. Reichenau, who had been commanding 6th Army under him, took the army group. 2 days later, Hitler flew to Poltava. Reichenau told him to his face that the withdrawal had been correct. Sepp Dietrich, commanding the SS motorized division in the sector, told him the same. Hitler met Rundstedt, excused himself, suggested the field marshal take some leave, and said he would want to call on his services again. He did. Rundstedt was back as Commander-in-Chief West in March 1942, and he held that post, with one interruption, until March 1945. The one point usually left out of that story is the medical one. Rundstedt was a heavy smoker, and in October at Poltava, he had suffered a mild heart attack. He was 65 years old, and he had been running an army group across 700 kilometers of front since June. Bock went next. Brauchitsch was dismissed as commander-in-chief of the army on the 19th of December, and Hitler took the post himself, which put the head of state, the head of government, the supreme commander of the armed forces, and the commander-in-chief of the army in the same body. Bock was relieved on the same day, officially on medical grounds, and Klug came up from 4th Army to take Army Group Center. Guderian, Hopner, and Strauss were all dismissed on the 25th. Leeb went last, and his ending is the one that reads worst against his own published work. In front of Tikhvin, out on his eastern flank, the Soviet counterattack came in at the beginning of December, and on the night of the 7th, he ordered the town given up. It was evacuated on the 9th, after a month in German hands. Through the rest of that month, and into January, the position around Demyansk came apart. On the 15th of January, 1942, with Hitler refusing him permission to shorten his line, the author of Die Abwehr asked either for freedom of action or to be relieved of his command. Hitler chose to relieve him. Küchler took Army Group North on the 17th of January. Now stop and look at what that sequence actually is, because this is the hinge of the whole file. The 3 men who launched the largest invasion in history were all out of command inside 7 weeks of each other. Rundstedt on the 1st of December, Bock on the 19th of December, Leeb on the 17th of January. Reichenau, who had replaced the first of them, collapsed after a run on the 14th of January and was dead within days, and Bock was pulled out of the reserve and given Army Group South on the 18th. Not one of the 3 was relieved for losing a battle. Rundstedt went for ordering a withdrawal that his own successor confirmed inside a day. Bock went on medical grounds, which is what the announcement said. Leeb went because he asked to. 3 different mechanisms, one result. Bock then did something in 1942 that ought to have fixed his name in place permanently, and did not. In the second week of May, Timoshenko attacked out of the Izium bridgehead toward Kharkov. Bock's army group let the attack run, then cut it off at the base with Kleist coming up from the south and Paulus holding in the north. Between the 12th and the 28th of May, the Soviet offensive was destroyed. Around 240,000 prisoners, against German casualties of roughly 20,000 killed, wounded, and missing. In terms of exchange rate, that is the most efficient German operation of the entire Eastern War, and almost no general audience in the English-speaking world associates it with the man who commanded it. He ran the opening of the 1942 summer offensive from the 28th of June. Army Group South was split in 2 on the 9th of July, and Bock kept the northern half as Army Group B. 6 days later, after an argument with Hitler over how long to spend clearing Voronezh, he was relieved for the second time and replaced by Maximilian von Weichs. He was 61 years old. He never held a command again. So here is the analytical point, and it is the reason this file exists. The sorting of these 3 names in Western memory does not track any measure of what they did. Test it. On results, Rundstedt's headquarters produced the largest encirclement of the war and then lost the first city. Germany was forced to give back. Bock's produced 2 of the 3 largest prisoner halls in military history, came within artillery range of the objective and failed, and then a year later produced the cheapest large victory the German army ever won in the East. Leeb's cleared the Baltic states in 11 days and then sat outside a city he was not allowed to take for 4 months. Those are 3 different kinds of outcome, and on the numbers, the one with the strongest claim on memory is the man nobody names. On rank, they are identical. 3 field marshals, promoted in the same ceremony on the same day. On tenure in the East, they are within 7 weeks of each other. On the criminal orders, all 3 received the same paper and all 3 passed it down. I think the sorting happened after 1945 and had almost nothing to do with the war, and the evidence for that is not an opinion, it is a bibliography. Look at what each man was in a position to do between 1945 and 1960, which is the exact window in which the Western account of the Eastern Front was written. Bock could do nothing, because Bock was dead. On the 3rd of May, 1945, on the road near Lensahn in Holstein, a low-flying fighter strafed the car he was traveling in. His wife, his stepdaughter, and his driver were killed. He died the next day in a naval hospital at Oldenburg in Holstein. He is the only German field marshal of the war killed directly by enemy action. He wrote no memoir, gave no interrogation of consequence, sat for no interview, and contributed nothing to the American historical program, because he was in the ground before any of it began. What survives of him is the diary, and the diary survived by accident of custody rather than by his choice. Leeb could do very little because Leeb was in custody. He was taken in May 1945 and held. The indictment in the case, the Americans filed as United States of America against Wilhelm von Leeb, and others went in on the 28th of November 1947. The trial ran before Military Tribunal 5 from the 30th of December, 1947, to the 28th of October, 1948. 14 defendants. Johannes Blaskowitz killed himself during the proceedings. Otto Schneewind and Hugo Sperle were acquitted outright. Kukler got 20 years, Karl von Rockes and Hans von Salmuth 20 each, Hoth and Reinhardt 15 each, Hermann Reinecke and Walter Warlimont life. Leeb was acquitted on 3 of the 4 counts and convicted on 1 for transmitting the Barbarossa jurisdiction decree and for its application by units under his command. He was sentenced to 3 years. He had been in custody for longer than that already, so the sentence was served on the day it was passed and he walked out of the building. The tribunal's language is worth having exactly. No criminal order had been introduced into evidence bearing his signature or the stamp of his approval. Valerie Hebert's Hitler's Generals on Trial, published by the University Press of Kansas in 2010, is the standard account of that trial and of how the tribunal reached that finding. Then he went home to Bavaria and stayed there. He died on the 29th of April 1956 at Hohenschwangau. His papers went to the archive. They came out 20 years after his death, in German from a scholarly press, and they stopped there. Rundstedt could do a great deal, and much of it was done for him. He was taken by American troops at Bad Tölz at the beginning of May 1945 and passed into British custody, first at Graysdale Hall and then at the officers' camp at Bridgend in South Wales, where he was given a private sitting room and bedroom. He appeared at the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg as a witness rather than a defendant. He was one of the senior officers who put their names to the memorandum submitted to that tribunal defending the General Staff and the High Command as an institution, which is the founding document of the whole post-war argument. Under Soviet pressure, the British cabinet decided in July 1948 to bring charges. Rundstedt was moved to Münsterlager along with Brauchitsch, Manstein, and Strauss. Brauchitsch died that October. Rundstedt and Strauss were released on medical grounds in 1949. Only Manstein was tried in Hamburg from the 23rd of August to the 19th of December 1949, convicted on 9 of 17 charges and sentenced to 18 years. So Rundstedt was never tried, never convicted, and free from 1949. He died in Hanover on the 24th of February, 1953. That gave him 4 years of liberty in which he was the most senior surviving German commander from the Western Theater, at exactly the moment when American and British publishers were looking for one. And he had Blumentritt. The book came out in 1952, in English, while he was alive to read it. There's a second mechanism, larger than any one book. After 1945, the United States Army employed former German officers to write the operational history of the Eastern Front, and the man who ran the German side of that program was Halder. The Halder Group produced more than 2,500 major manuscripts from more than 700 German authors. Halder ran a control group of trusted former officers who vetted submissions and sent them back for changes. Those studies became the raw material for the Western understanding of the campaign for a generation, and they were written by men with reputations, pensions, and in several cases pending trials in play. In 1961, Halder received the meritorious Civilian Service Award from the United States government, which makes him the only German decorated by both Hitler and an American president. Blumentritt worked in that program. So did a long list of others. Bock was dead and Leeb was in a cell, and neither of them had anything to do with it. Add the memoirs on top. Guderian's book, Manstein's book, Friedrich von Mellenthin's Panzer Battles, still selling through 6 English printings by the middle 1970s. Hans Ulrich Rudel's account of his own war passed 1 million copies. Every one of those authors had a version of the campaign to sell and a reason to sell it, and the 3 men who ran the army groups in 1941 are supporting characters in all of them when they appear at all. The correction took decades, and it was done in German first. Manfred Messerschmitt on the army inside the Nazi state in 1969. Christian Streit on the Soviet prisoners in 1978. Helmut Krausnick and Hans-Heinrich Wilhelm on the killing squads and the Army's dealings with them in 1981. Then the Hamburg exhibition on the crimes of the Wehrmacht, which opened in 1995 and traveled 33 German and Austrian cities and caused a public argument that ran for years. Almost none of that reached English-language general readers on anything like the same scale as the memoirs it was correcting. The last piece is Normandy. Rundstedt was Commander-in-Chief West on the 6th of June, 1944. That put him in every American and British account of the invasion, in the newsreels, in the operational studies, and eventually in the films. Leeb and Bock never appear in a Western theater narrative at all, because after the middle of 1942, neither of them held a command anywhere. There is one more thing worth saying about the paper itself, because it cuts the other way, and it is the reason any of this can be checked at all. The German army's files were captured whole. They were shipped to the United States, cataloged, microfilmed reel by reel, and returned to the Federal Republic across the 1950s and 60s. The Army group records went on to their own microfilm series, which the American Archives catalog under the designation T311. Everything an Army group headquarters generated in 1941, the orders out, the situation reports in, the distribution lists, the rear area correspondence, sits in that series in the order it was filed. Which means the raw material for all three men has been publicly available and equally accessible for more than 60 years. Nobody hid Leeb. Nobody buried Bock. The evidence was on the same shelves for anyone who went looking. What differed was who wrote the books that most readers actually read, and in what language, and how early. Memory follows the paper. The paper followed who was alive, who was employable, and who was written about in English. A few figures that belong on the record have not been said yet. German losses in the East from the 22nd of June to the end of 1941, from the Army's own medical returns, came to 186,452 killed, 40,157 missing, and 655,179 wounded, 2,735 tanks written off, 2,827 aircraft. On the other side, Soviet returns for 1941 give 566,852 killed in action and 2,335,482 missing or captured, out of total military casualties of about 4.5 million. Kleist's Panzer Group was redesignated 1st Panzer Army on the 6th of October, still under Kleist. That was a promotion of the formation and not of its strength, and its running tank total had been falling since the last week of June. Army Group Center on the 1st of October, at the opening of Typhoon, is variously assessed at between 1.18 million and 1.93 million men, depending on whether rear services are counted. That is a spread of 750,000 men on one formation on one day, and it is a fair warning about how soft even the German figures are once you get above division level. Now the rest of the file in the same voice. The Reichenau order is dated the 10th of October, 1941. Its title is The Conduct of the Troops in the Eastern Theater. It told soldiers they were not merely fighters under the rules of war, but bearers of a racial idea, and it demanded understanding for what it called the atonement to be exacted from Jewry. Hitler read it, called it excellent, and directed that it be circulated as a model for the other commanders. Rundstedt was Reichenau's superior when it was written. He passed it down through Army Group South to his senior commanders with a covering note, stating that he thoroughly concurred with its contents, and he pressed them to issue versions of their own. That is set out in the Hamburg Institute for Social Research's volume, The German Army and Genocide, published in 1999. 2.5 weeks before that, on the 24th of September, the same headquarters had issued an order forbidding soldiers from taking independent action against Jews and from photographing the work of the special detachments. Both orders came out of the same building inside 3 weeks. Both are in the record and both belong in it. Einsatzgruppe C and Einsatzgruppe D operated in Army Group South's area. By December 1941, those two groups had killed between 100,000 and 150,000 people. On the 29th and 30th of September 1941, at the ravine at Babi Yar outside Kiev, 33,771 Jews were shot in 2 days, a figure that comes from the killer's own operational report. Officers of Reichenau's 6th Army took part in organizing it, days after the Army had taken the city. In Army Group North's area, the corresponding formation was Einsatzgruppe A under Franz Walter Stahlecker. Its comprehensive report on operations up to the 15th of October 1941 entered evidence at Nuremberg. It records the cooperation of the Army in the Baltic in approving terms. Leeb knew. Franz von Roches, commanding the Army Group rear area, briefed him on the killings in late June and early July 1941. Leeb's own diary records what he took from the conversation, which was that the thing to do was to keep one's distance, and that the two of them had agreed that sterilizing Jewish men might be the more humane course. That entry is in the Meyer edition. It is the reason the Meyer edition matters. The starvation of the cities was not a consequence of the fighting. It was decided in advance in Berlin at a meeting of state secretaries on the 2nd of May, 1941, 7 weeks before the frontier was crossed. The minute of that meeting states plainly that the war could only be continued if the whole armed force was fed out of Russia in the 3rd year, and that many millions of people would starve as a result if what was needed was taken out of the country. That paper is in the Nuremberg document series. It is the founding document of the food policy every army group then executed as a matter of supply administration. Leningrad had its own paper, a memorandum produced within the naval staff on the 22nd of September 1941, set out that there was no interest in preserving even part of the population of what it still called Petersburg, that the city was to be sealed and worn down by fire and hunger, and that any offer of surrender was to be refused. 2 weeks after that, the instruction was restated. Leeb's army group did not write those documents. It carried them out for 4 months, and then handed the ring intact to Küchler. The standing reprisal policy had numbers written into it as well. Keitel's order of the 16th of September 1941 on communist insurgency in the occupied territories fixed a rate of atonement for the killing of a German soldier at up to 100 communist lives, with the floor of the band set at half that number, and it directed that the method of execution should increase the deterrent effect. That is not a field improvisation by a junior officer. That is an arithmetic instruction issued from the top of the Armed Forces High Command and distributed downward through exactly the same routing slips as the fuel allocations. Behind each army group ran a rear area command with security divisions on its establishment, 9 of them across the Eastern Front in the original order of battle, and those formations existed to hold ground that had already been taken. The prisoner figures the encirclements produced went into their custody. Of the roughly 6 million Soviet soldiers Germany captured across the war, about 3 million died in German hands, and the greater part of that dying was done early. Of the more than 3 million taken in 1941, 2/3 were dead of starvation, exposure, and disease by the early weeks of 1942, at a rate that ran between 300,000 and 500,000 a month through that first winter. Most of them died in the custody of the army, not of the SS. Christian Streit's Keine Kameraden, published in 1978, was the study that established it, and Christian Hartmann and Dieter Pohl have since worked the figures over without moving them much. Army Group South also lived off the land under standing policy. Livestock, grain, and dairy produce were requisitioned in quantity. The transport did not exist to move most of it west, so it was consumed locally and denied to the population. Mass starvation followed in Kiev and in Kharkov. Stephen Fritz sets that out in Ostkrieg, published by the University Press of Kentucky in 2011. 2 last items from the file. Hitler paid his senior officers, and Norman Goda's study of the practice, published in 2005 under the title Black Marks, works through the mechanics of it. Leeb, unemployed from January 1942 onwards, received a gift from Hitler, and the estate at Seestetten that came out of it has been valued at around 660,000 Reichsmarks. That figure comes to us through Goda, and I have not seen it independently confirmed. And in August 1944, Rundstedt took the chair of the Court of Honor that expelled officers implicated in the 20th of July plot from the Wehrmacht, which removed them from military jurisdiction and delivered them to the People's Court. Now the documents themselves, and which of them will hold weight. Bock's diary is the most reliable of the 3 personal records, and for one specific reason. It was dictated as the campaign ran, and its author died before he had any opportunity to revise it against a courtroom or a publisher. Every other senior German account of 1941 that reached English readers was written by a man who already knew what he was being accused of. Bock's was not. That does not make it true. A war diary is a commander's case for his own decisions, written daily, and Bock's is heavy on complaint about his superiors and light on his own errors. But it is uncontaminated by 1946, and almost nothing else in the English language corpus can say that. Leeb's is the opposite case, and just as useful. He wrote it for himself, he was tried on the strength of documents that were not it, and the edition we have was prepared by a scholar working in the German military historical tradition, with apparatus. I think the single most consequential absence in the English language record of the Eastern Front is that this book has never been translated, because it is the only place a reader can watch an army group commander receive information about mass killing in his own rear area, and then write down what he decided to do about it. Rundstedt is the hardest of the 3 because he left the least. What is attributed to him comes mostly through other men. Blumentritt's book is the Chief of Staff's portrait of his own commander, published for an English audience while both were living, and it should be read as advocacy rather than as evidence. Rundstedt's own words survived mainly in testimony given under caution. At Nuremberg, he stated that the attitude of the army toward the Commissar order had been unanimously and absolutely against it, and that the order was simply not carried out. That is contradicted by the compliance record across the Eastern armies. The The claim and the counter-evidence are both a matter of record, and the covering note on the Reichenau order is on the other side of the same ledger. There is a general rule in here that is worth having. When a memoir and a contemporaneous document disagree, take the document, and when two documents disagree, ask who was counting and what he was counting for. That is why the prisoner totals in this script are given twice wherever the two sides differ. The cleanest demonstration of that rule is not any of these three men. It is Halder. His wartime diary was published in Germany in 3 volumes across the early 1960s, edited by Hans Adolf Jakobsen, and it is the indispensable day-by-day source for what the Army High Command thought it was doing in 1941. Set that book beside the studies Halder was supervising for the Americans in the same years, and the two texts are describing the same events from inside the same head, with a decade and a change of audience between them. The diary is candid about intentions that the studies do not mention. I think that pairing is the most instructive thing an interested reader can do with an afternoon, because it removes the argument from personalities entirely. It is the same man, and the difference is who is going to read it. Apply that to our 3. Bock has a diary and nothing else, which is the wartime voice with no later one. Leeb has a diary that was published as history rather than as advocacy. Rundstedt has no diary at all and everything else, which is to say only later voices, his own under caution, and Blumentritz under contract, which leaves the corrective. Herder's collective study is the work that closed the argument, because by taking 25 commanders at once, he was able to show that the conduct of any one of them was not personal to him. Geoffrey McGargy's War of Annihilation, published in 2006, does the same job for an English readership at much shorter length, and his Inside Hitler's High Command, from 2000, explains the command machinery that made 3 army groups answerable to a structure with no means of choosing between them. David Stiles' volumes on Barbarossa, on Kiev, on Typhoon, and on Moscow work the operational side out of the German unit records, rather than out of the general's books. What the record contains is this: 3 field marshals of the same rank, promoted on the same day, took 3 army groups across the Soviet frontier on the 22nd of June, 1941. Between them, they took more prisoners in 6 months than any comparable force in history. All 3 received the jurisdiction decree and the commissar order and passed them down. One of them forwarded a subordinate's order on the conduct of troops with his concurrence written across it. One of them recorded in his diary what he had been told about the killings behind his own front and what he had decided to do about it. One of them protested to Army High Command and then executed what he had protested against. All 3 were relieved of command within 7 weeks of one another. Only one of them ever commanded again, and he did it in the West, where the Americans and the British could see him. After the war, one was dead, one was convicted, and released the same day on time served, and one was charged, never tried, and freed on medical grounds. The dead man's diary was translated. The convicted man's diary was not. The man who left no diary at all got 2 books. That's what the record shows. The sources are in the description. I'll see you in the next one.